Hi.
You look so cute.
Oh, stop.
I know, the long hair's so cute. Yeah.
Oh, Buffy, Andrea, thanks for coming to the house today. How are you?
Great,
I'm
thanks.
sleepy.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm not very smart today. Andrea's the brains in the family.
Well, dig deep and get it together. 'Cause we have,
Dig deep and get it together.
the last time that we you were on the old talk show that I did, it was about a different book about your life, and now this one. Why is this one different? Why is this story?
Well, there was a reason why I said yes to my first biographer. Blair Stonechild is the head of Native Studies in Saskatchewan at First Nations University in Regina. He knew my family, my dad. He speaks Cree. I knew that he would get certain things right that no other biographer would ever get right. So I was very, very grateful. But it's not a music book. Blair is a great historian, and it's quite a historical book, a bit dry, yes? But then Andrea, it's totally the opposite. It's fun, it's funny, it's rich, it's artistic, it's poetic, it's beautifully written. So they're very different books about the same subject.
I like how this. Right off the drop, it's everybody. You're laughing about all the people who think you played Woodstock. That makes me laugh.
It's the truth.
It's so hilarious. Now, they either think you're Melanie or Joan Baez because not that many women played Woodstock. So
No, not that many. But I think people want to believe you were there.
Yeah.
Oh, I tell you, after almost every concert, somebody will come up and say, I just loved you at Woodstock. You were so good. And I wasn't there, and neither was Joni Mitchell.
No.
So, and I just saw Joni not long ago, and it was one of the things we talked about. He said, everybody comes and compliments her on how good she was at Woodstock. She wasn't there either.
No, but at least with Joni, she was on the bill, and she decided not to go and watched it from a hotel room.
And then she wrote a great song.
A great song about it. She wrote the best song about something she wasn't there for.
I wasn't
A lot
even
of
there.
people were on drugs, though, I guess,
That is
right?
true.
Like, that's kind of part of what the mythology is.
That is
so,
true.
yeah.
Andrea, so you didn't set out to write a book about Buffy Sainte-Marie, did you?
Well, I mean, yeah, sort of.
I mean,
yes.
I'm saying when you first interviewed and met her.
Oh, no. Well, when I left the conversation. I interviewed her, Buffy for Power in the Blood. That's the first time we did an interview together. We had such a nice time on the phone. I didn't want to get off the call, and I was thinking that, and then she said the same thing, and I was like, oh my God, Buffy doesn't want to stop talking to me. That's nice. and I left that sort of moment thinking it would be really amazing to write an authorized biography of Buffy Sainte-Marie, just because, one, in my research for our interview, I'd had a really hard time coming up with stuff. Even though she's this sort of iconic person, there hadn't been a lot of material written about her in sort of like traditional music journalism periodicals and a lot of the same spaces that we see Joni or Bob Dylan or somebody else written about. And so then when I had the opportunity to sort of pitch an idea, I wanted to see if Buffy and her team would be interested in me writing an authorized biography, because I don't want to do an unauthorized one. That's not of interest to me. I wanted Buffy to be involved, and they said they were interested, so that was mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, my manager called up and said, oh, yeah, somebody else wants to write a book about you. I said, oh, God, no, who, what? He said, her name is Andrea Warner. And I said, just say yes.
That was it? Just that easy?
Yeah, because by that time I had read her book about Alanis Morissette, Shania Twain, Sarah McLachlan, and
Celine Dion.
And Celine, yeah. And,
I mean, you're just going
had
down the
loved
list of iconic women that Canada has been a part of.
I mean, honestly, that's a great mission. If I have one mission in my life, is to, actually sort of women in Canadian music have so often become sort of like these jokes or these marginalized people. And even if they're hugely famous, like We Oughta Know, nobody would have ever really known that those four women are the best-selling Canadian artists in Canada. Everyone sort of thinks of everybody but them.
You think they're marginalized because they're women, or just Canada just tends to destroy everybody who gets really famous? That's kind of what, I mean, I know that the fact that they're women plays a role.
A and a little column B. No, but I just think that, like, so often when we're talking about even, like, I think of Buffy and Joni Mitchell and Neil Young and Leonard Cohen as sort of the core four of sort of Canadian artists.
Agreed.
And the, amazing songwriters. But I do strongly feel like a lot of people really just talk about Neil Young or Leonard Cohen, and then don't talk as much about Joni Mitchell and Buffy Sainte-Marie, and then they certainly don't talk as much about Buffy Sainte-Marie as they should. And it's just really important to me that we, like, spend some time unpacking why that is and who gets left out and how we sort of talk about people and give them credit for their artistry, because there's erasure. If we don't talk about them, it's erasure.
Well, I think we know why, though, right? We know why. We know that the government and the president of the United States would write letters praising radio stations that blacklisted you and didn't want to play people in the indigenous movement, never mind just protests. So there was an active effort by the media and the government to shut down the story of you.
Yeah, there was, but I didn't know it was going on for maybe 20 years later. You know, it's not as though they say, hey, guess what? You're under surveillance. We've got files on you. When I finally saw those FBI files, I mean, I told my lawyer, I don't have any FBI files. I've never broken the law. I didn't smoke pot on the White House lawn. I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything particularly startling, positive or negative. But sure enough, there were 31 pages on me, and all they proved was that I had never done anything. And yet, there were letters in the files I remember one from a woman who had written asking about this Sainte-Marie character, finding out if I was guilty of something. They wrote back and they said, we can't tell you what's in the files. We have 31 pages on her, but we can't tell you what's in the files, right. Which kind of leaves a suspect aroma in the air, so it's kind of weird. Yeah, but it's not the government that does that. It's a couple of guys in the back room of a certain administration. And so often in Canada and in the U.S., probably other countries too, we tend to say, oh, I hate thy country because, no, it's not your country. It's an administration. It's a handful of guys who pretty much for 4 years will do what they want to do and what they're being paid to do, by the guys who support them. So it's quite partisan, and it kind of takes the wind out of it in a way, I think, the government hates me. No. That's a big cobra. That's a big snake. Nobody can deal with that. But no, it's just a couple of wormy little guys in the back room who make nasty phone calls to the media.
Well, I get into a lot of debates with my friends about my punk rock version of politics, and so I present it to you this way. Through inaction, by allowing administrations to behave this way, are the people not responsible for their government? So that I know that they go, oh, well, we didn't elect this person, but both Canada and the United States and many countries around the world have generations of this behavior, and many generations, we know about it. So if we don't raise our voices, are we not then responsible for the behaviors of, Justin Trudeau buying a pipeline, Doug Ford canceling education, Donald Trump being the white supremacist that he is? Are we not responsible for that as the people?
Right on.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, silence is violence, and we know that. We see that, and that's why I think showing up and raising your voice, showing up to the marches, being present, and I think really showing up is an act of love. For our community and for those who are marginalized.
It is a little tricky, though, the combination of show business and a mission. Yeah. It's a little tricky because most people in show business are like most people in sports. They just want to do their thing and make a lot of money and, overcome whatever they're trying to overcome in their childhood, And yet some people in the arts have had a mission. And for me, the mission was kind of first. I never expected to get into show business. I had a degree. I was a senior in college at the University of Massachusetts. I had a degree in Oriental philosophy, a degree in education. And I found out 3 weeks before I was supposed to graduate that they weren't going to let me graduate. I said, what? I had straight A's. I was one of the 10 most outstanding seniors in my class. But I was told I couldn't graduate because in freshman year, there had been a compulsory course, and I had aced it. And if you aced the speech, you were exempt from taking the class, but they never told my guidance counselor or me that we would have to make up the credit during those 4 years. So I found out 3 weeks before graduation that I couldn't graduate. So I thought I had been on the way to India to go to a college where Mahatma Gandhi had been teaching. And instead, I wound up in show business. And although I never got to go on that mission to hang out with the creator in the creative arts, I took the same mission into show business. So really, I never expected to last in show business or be a big deal. So I wasn't that disappointed when it kind of fell apart. But when I found out 20 years later that I had actually been blacklisted, that's a different story. Now you stepped on my intelligence,
that's
know?
Right. Yeah. And so we're talking, you put out a record or two a year, almost every year, until 76. Mm-hmm. And then from 76 to 92, no records.
Well,
Right.
my son was born in
Yes.
1976.
And you went to Sesame Street, and
Yeah.
so you were very busy still.
Yeah,
You won an
busy.
Academy Award during that time.
Yeah, that's
too.
right,
During
yeah.
that time,
Like
too,
a-
yeah.
You know,
but I wasn't recording.
You weren't
You're
recording.
right. Yes, correct.
What I always find interesting about speaking to you specifically is that the mission is such an important part of the conversation, but the songs are really good. So we could also just have a musical conversation of the things that you like and the things that inspire you that aren't mission based. Just what were songs in your head? Did you have melodies you wanted to get out?
Gosh, from the time I was 3, songs were popping into my head.
You were at the piano at that age,
I
right?
was at the piano, yeah. I'm self-taught. Like many musicians, I never learned how to read music, and I only found out a few years ago that I'm actually dyslexic in music, even though I'm a biblioholic for
Right,
text.
right.
I read everything. I can write for an orchestra. It's not as though I don't know how, but I can't read it back the next day. And, I'm trying to get the Junos interested in doing maybe a 2-minute little video on all the great musicians who were shunned and shamed in school music classes because they couldn't read European notation. Yeah? You can't read music, you can't be in band, you can't be a musician, you can't read music. I mean, Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, Chet Atkins, Wes Montgomery, some amazing musicians. Never learned how to read, but it didn't hurt their playing.
It's kind of like that great extension into real life that people oversell education as one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, but it makes money.
That's it. It's
Yeah.
just a business.
Yeah.
Exactly, and I always compare it to like when my son was born, and I woke up in the hospital, and my baby was born, and I wanted to breastfeed my baby, but doctors didn't know anything about that. There's no funding into colleges by I mean, where does the money come out of breasts? There's no money in it, so it's
I mean,
kind of
there
the
is,
same thing.
but it's different.
There is.
Yeah, there is. Yeah,
It's a different
learning
industry.
it's a different industry altogether. Yeah.
Yeah.
Live and learn it.
Yeah, all dirty. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're right. There was no understanding of it. But you ended up doing that on Sesame Street. Imagine that. Like, imagine that conversation on Sesame Street. What that would have been like.
Oh, it was nothing. I was feeding my baby, off camera,
Yep.
whenever he needed to be fed. I said, have you done anything on breastfeeding? And similarly to when I asked them, have you done anything on Native American programming? They said, oh, great idea, let's do it. And it was not controversial at the time, no problem. But now, doggone it, now it's controversial. Somebody will put it up on YouTube and somebody will take it down. Yeah.
And it's under a minute.
Curious,
Like
huh?
it's a 1-minute clip, with you and Big Bird, and it's so effective and it's so simple. There's nothing overwritten about it. It's just totally normal.
This is an interesting thing about inclusion, right? It's
Yeah.
not that they intentionally didn't want that stuff covered. They hadn't thought of it until you showed up. And why diversity is nice, but inclusion is stronger.
Inclusion makes such a difference, and that modeling visibility and all of these different things. Like, I think of when you indigenized the Virginian, I mean, that was in 1968, so it's like the 50th anniversary this year of that happening. And
it is, huh?
Yeah. I like anniversaries. That's the but you brought just such a simple. I mean, it's kind of a power move that people would look at it as a power move now, but that wasn't the way you looked at it at all. You just wanted to this makes sense because this will make your product better.
Exactly. I knew I could make it better. What we're talking about, Georgia, The Virginian was a 2-hour, it was the first 2-hour movie series for TV. And they wanted me to take a role as a young indigenous woman coming back from having gone to school back east. And I said, well, you'd have to fatten up the part. And, of course, I would like to have all of the other indigenous parts played by indigenous people. And they said, oh, come on, that's impossible. Oh, maybe the featured roles, but, we've got Italians and Jews and Armenians and people from all over the world, and this is professional movies. I mean, we've got makeup and we've got costumes. And I said, no, it's more than just the look that indigenous people bring into the room. It's more than just hair and makeup. It's a whole cultural experience. And if you have not had that experience, can you imagine if The Sopranos had not been done by people who were familiar with the entire cultural feel of, Italian-American family?
Right.
It wouldn't have been nearly as good. So Andrea's right. What I was going for, it wasn't a power move. I just thought that we could make it better. And I turned them on to my friends in Hollywood. There were over 25,000 Native American people living in Los Angeles. I turned them on to Jay Silverheels, who's from Six Nations, by the way. He's Cayuga or Seneca, I think. Anyway, he and Lois Red Elk, who's from Montana, they were running an Indian Actors Workshop. So what I did was make that connection. I wasn't trying to tear anything down. I enabled them to do something better by showing them something that they hadn't known about.
So even though you weren't trying to tear things down, at some point you're going to run up against obstacles, and then you either have to climb something or tear it down. So was it? I can't imagine this was easy for you or effortless for you, but you just continue to go through and change these things.
When I can.
When you can.
But it's not difficult. There's not a lot of effort in it. There's effort in it when you're disappointed because you didn't pull it off, because somebody just didn't get it.
But did you face a lot of resistance?
Probably less than you would think. It's just a mess. Sometimes you just have to.
So
you just have to have the courage to figure out where the door is, go in and ring the bell and talk to the guy.
So this is what I wonder about you, because you're one of the only people in your position who seems to have been able to do this without that much resistance. Even though you did have a career blacklist. I don't know that, of course. But based on what she's saying,
But I think about with the Virginian, one of the things you said to me was, I just didn't care if I got it. That's the thing. I think if you're sort of if you're not invested personally in that get, which we talk a lot about in the book, is the get for you is very different. You're inspired by different things. You're motivated by different things. It's not sex, drugs, and rock and roll for you. It's
not all anyway.
Not all. Part time, but no, it's just you have these different motivations, and I think that that's really important, because if you run up against that resistance and you're fine to walk away, again, it's a real power move,
right.
But it's actually just real, because you're not in it for the notoriety and being on TV and having your face everywhere.
Mm-hmm. But Andrea, to George's point, I think it also plays into what we're going through today with Truth and Reconciliation. As I cross the country back and forth, and I'm playing for a lot of Canadians of all different backgrounds, and I think a lot of people at first, they heard about Truth and Reconciliation, and they mistakenly thought, oh God, here come the Indians, they're going to shove it up our nose, how terrible we've been. No, that's not what reconciliation is about. Native people have been resisting for 500 years the same damn things that made Europeans want to leave Europe in the first place. We're all on the same side here. The feudal system, the pecking order, whoever has the most coins rules. The Inquisition, the Roman Empire, the serial killers on the thrones of Europe. These were terrible, terrible oppressions. And Native people are in the same position with trying to do away with the same things that Europeans were trying to do away with in early history. So I think there's a little bit of room to think of it in that way.
Do you? Ian Campo was here, and he said that he almost welled up telling this story, and he said he actually gets tears in his eyes regularly when he thinks about this. I think it was backstage at the Junos. You'd said to him, "You're thankful that it's not so lonely back here anymore, that there was more representation," and it really hit him, and then he hit all of us when he said that.
Oh,
what was that like? That
it
seeing the
makes
shift.
a big difference. For such a long time, I've been the only Indigenous person in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not as though that's a great burden or a great weight, but gee, it sure is nice to have some people who already know the subtext, And I don't know, it's just nice to have company, like-minded thinkers in the room at the same time. It's not just where you come from and how you look. It's how you feel and what you've been through and what you bring to whatever it is you're trying to change. By the way, had you noticed that at the Junos, probably the same one that Ian's talking about, they asked me to open the show just before Tanya Tagaq and Tribe Called Red came on. And they gave me a script, and it was the same old politically correct script. We are in the territory, unceded territory of the whoever's for millennia. Yeah. So I said, I'm not going to read this. So I made some phone calls. I called some local Aboriginal leaders and elders, and I said, here's how I want to change it. The word unceded, in the first place, unceded is lawyer talk. It means it stops stops you for a minute. What the heck is that? It means unseated. Is it a tennis match and you didn't, Is it how you're ranked? Is it unseated? You don't have a chair, you're unseated, you don't have a seat? I mean, what the heck is it? It slows you down. And then millennia. Who says millennia? Millennia? So I changed it and I said, we are in the unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people, who for thousands and thousands and thousands of years have looked after this territory.
So do I have your permission to change that? Because every time I host an event, they hand me a paper and it's all the same. Because Canadians right now are so terrified of saying it wrong. The details, like some of these introductions, and I'm happy to do them. I think it's important. But the language doesn't sound like anything other than a white politician freaking out. Is it important to hear those kind of acknowledgments off the top?
I think it's important, but I think it's important to put it in the vernacular language that everybody will understand. Yeah. So if you were to change it the same way that I did and say unsurrendered instead of unseated, and to say thousands and thousands and thousands instead of millennia, right? Get in touch with me and I'll send you the details as to exactly who gave me that green light.
I'll have to do it in Saskatchewan this weekend.
Important.
I think so too.
I think it is too, especially because you hear it so often. I've seen so many audiences, especially in Vancouver, where I'm from, just not really take the time to think about what those words mean. If it just becomes lip service, that's not really doing the actual work of decolonization. Like, we need to spend a bit more time with more meaningful language around that. So Unsurrendered was one of my favorite things about that Junos.
And when you say things like people really talk, you embrace more people.
Yes.
And it doesn't seem like, now we have to go stand up and do a formality.
No,
now you're talking about us instead of whoever.
And you're actually applying the real words.
Yes.
Like you're not watering it down.
Well, and that's like naming.
Thank you.
Yeah, and naming it with like truth. And I think about like how you talk about what you've always brought to your songwriting, which is that you were a journalist spreading the news. That was like your earliest idea of songwriting. That's bringing truth with you in every song. That's so important. Of course, that's how you want to see language be inclusive, and that's how you do it.
I was thinking about the issues that face everybody today. One of the number one issues in any part of the country, both countries, specifically non-urban centers, is opioid addiction. I was thinking about your history and what you must think of this.
Well, at the time, my song Codeine was being attributed to Donovan anyway. So is Universal Soldier.
Right, yes.
Maybe not him, but his managers, and they never corrected anybody.
Hopefully you got paid for Universal Soldier. If you did, then that's okay.
Oh, no, Universal Soldier I gave away for $1. You got to read Andrea's book.
Yeah, no, I know, but it's better if you tell the story than I tell the story.
Well, no, but back to your first question about opioid addiction. When I was first starting out, I was in Florida, and I'd had bronchitis, and I was also mourning the death of someone. Anyway, I was feeling kind of low, and the people at the coffee house, it was the one that Freddie Neal in Coconut Grove was running, as a matter of fact, they sent me to a doctor who started giving me pills and shots. Every day, come on over and get your shot. I thought he was giving me B12. I got into a car with some friends. We were going to Atlanta. As a matter of fact, we were going to see someone related to Howard Zinn. And I went to a pharmacy and I said, I just feel so terrible. I need to fill this prescription. He said, I can't fill this from out of state. And I said, I'm feeling terrible. And he said, he asked me how long I'd been taking this. He said, you're addicted to this. And I said, what? And he told me that it was codeine. And I said, codeine? I thought that was, 222s and cough syrup. He said, no, it's an opioid. It's the same as heroin, morphine, and all the modern doctor-dentist drugs that everybody's addicted to now. So I wrote a song called Codeine. So it's not as though I was strung out on the streets by choice because I had too much party.
But you see how easy
it was an assault by a doctor.
Well, this is it. And you see how easy it is for people to get it. It's about understanding, right? Everybody sees somebody with addiction and says they made that choice.
Yeah,
and
but
it doesn't
now,
work that way.
The terrible thing that's out there now, it's a terrible, horrible lesson. Mm-hmm. A lot of fine people have been addicted by their doctors to something that they can't quit. Yeah. And it's terrible. I was very sick with it. Yeah. So, and I did get through it. And I just encourage anybody, try to get through it. Just try to get through it. Yeah.
What a long, strange trip it's been for you, hasn't it?
Not long enough. I'm still here.
No.
Oh, yeah. It's nowhere near over. Yeah.
You at least 1,000 to go. At least 1,000 to go. as a fan and as a music fan,
Absolutely.
what did you learn about Buffy in this process and yourself?
Oh my God. Well, I feel like I learned so much about Buffy. I mean, obviously, we were on the phone for, forever. Yeah. Like 60 hours is a conservative estimate that I gave for like our actual interviewing process. But I mean, I didn't entirely know how funny she was before we started the interview process. We have laughed so much in the last couple of years and continue to laugh, right? Like even just being on tour this week together, she's so funny. And, and she like can sort of swing between that childlike enthusiasm for something to like super funny and dirty. And I love that. I love that sort of like broad spectrum. And I think it's so effective for just life as a strategy. And it really sort of infuses, the hope that I've always heard in all of her music. I think that's part of like the humor. That's part of the creative process for her. So, for myself, like one of the things and I talk a little bit about this in the afterword is just, she really, shifted my perception because, for example, when Buffy edited this manuscript many times, she read it a lot. Great proofreader. If this whole business doesn't work out for her, excellent.
My mom was a proofreader.
Yeah, excellent side career in proofreading and copyediting. But just a really thorough reader. And at one point, I had said, tear down, and she crossed that out and she was like, no, build up in spite of and beyond. And that was a real paradigm shift for me to think about language in the way that we can be our most helpful person as opposed to our most sort of cynical person. There's easy ways to sort of shift into darkness, especially right now, but I do have so much hope in me, and I have even more now that I've written this book. And I think that's a lifelong lesson that I'll always have.
If you, which is a great lesson to have.
Yeah.
If you focus so hard on the current administration, it's easy for people to get lost in it. But if you do any historical digging at all, you'll realize that presidents have behaved this way a long time.
Yes.
And so this isn't really that new. The only difference is now that they're operating in the public, and maybe that's significant. When the Women's March, the first one happened, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I watched the gathering there. And then I was in LA for the next one. And then you look around and see this incredible shift publicly. Mm-hmm. But you were there for the equal rights, conversation in the beginning. I heard you talk about civil rights in the past. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, for you, having the history that you have, and not just the history as a woman and as a woman of color, but the history as somebody who's told the news for so long. When you look at where we're at today and you hear the conversation around change, how do you sit with that?
Well, in the first place, I think it's important, what you just said. Bad leadership, there's nothing new in that. Bad leadership, misogyny, the profit motive and greed, controlling by fear. This goes back to before the Old Testament, folks. To before the Old Testament. This is the model upon which oppression has been structured for thousands of years in Europe. Again, this is why Europeans wanted to leave Europe, right? We've come through it before. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it was a bloody mess, like Hitler, right? Yeah. But, I was there when Nixon was doing his thing, and people were, when nice people were afraid to say anything, and when young hippies were just, disowned because they dared to say something about Lyndon Johnson, businessman Lyndon Johnson.
That's right.
His whole Vietnam War is all business.
Yeah.
That's what we have to understand.
They kept
in
that
Canada
war going.
today. The whole business model upon which North America is run, and most of the world, it's wrong. It's wrong. Take as much as you can get and give the least you can. That's wrong.
Do you think it's going to change?
The only time Jesus ever got mad, right, is when he threw the money changers out of the temple.
That's right.
And I'm kind of in that perspective as you asked the question.
Right.
Yeah, so I did see that happen. I wasn't really a part of the civil rights movement, although I was friends with Stokely Carmichael, Muhammad Ali. Dick Gregory came to my reserve, and he was crying in Saskatoon, by the way, about misogyny. When you go to Saskatoon, ask about it. But But, there was nobody paying any attention to Native American rights.
Yeah.
Nobody ever even thought of it. Oh, the Indians, they vanished. Oh, it's a sad story. Oh, they're all gone now.
Yeah.
Oh, move on, right? But Peter, Paul, and Mary, Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, Bob, they never showed up for any of that. Nothing. Pete Seeger expected me to stand there on a stage and sing, "This land is your land, this land is my land." And meanwhile, Charlie Hill, he made a version of these. Yeah, this land is my land. This land used to be my land. This land is your land. Right? Right. You can't.
They wanted you to be there for them, but they weren't there for you.
Yeah, but not because they wanted to be mean to Indians. It just never crossed their screen.
Right.
Yeah, we are. And one thing I think we have to remember in Canada, the music industry, for instance, the white music industry has hundreds of thousands of people getting paid to be in it and to do a great job and to pump it up and make it bigger. The black industry, a smaller number, but a similarly huge impact.
Yeah.
Latino, we don't have an indigenous music industry. And we are what, 2% of the population, I think? Is that it? I think 2% of the population. We're a tiny minority. We're no threat. We're no threat. We have so much to give, and it's so hard to give it. Yeah? I mean, our indigenous artists have been struggling for years. Now, happily, we're hearing about at least a few of them, but not nearly enough.
Right, yeah. I mean, the Polaris Prize, far more represented in the last bunch of years. They're taking this seriously.
Isn't that something?
And the Jeremy Dutcher record was amazing because of it.
Oh my God, so good.
So good.
So
So it is changing, but change is incremental, and that's the great crime. But it is.
Yeah,
right?
but even with the Polaris Prize, I hear people say, it says, oh, they're going to give it to another Indian, Oh, they're all alike. But listen to each of our albums.
Yeah, it's so much variety, and that's the thing. That's
totally
so
different.
It's different music entirely,
and each unique.
It's so unique. Yeah. And there's no way that you could listen to those albums and not be like, oh, this is incredibly artistic, beautiful music. And I think of someone not to throw him under the bus, but I was so mad at that tweet by Jonathan Simkin, who was basically named 4 minorities, put them in a band, and then you've got the winner of next year's Polaris Prize or something to that effect.
Missed the point.
He just doubled down on what he values, which is not great stuff. But anyway, I was just so, and so when we have someone like him who is a huge industry power person, still really clinging to sort of old-fashioned racist ideas like that, that tokenism is sort of what motivates anybody to do anything. He's missing the artistry. And that's a real loss on his part because he's not listening to the music.
And one of the lovely things about the Polaris Prize, though, is that they do reward originality, whatever color it it happens to be these guys right now.
Yeah.
And I think it's something to be said, too, to the reality of the indigenous arts. Many of my fellow artists in the indigenous community have kind of grown themselves. Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, it's not because your cousin, had an in with the record company. So congratulations to the Polaris voters for continually rewarding excellence and originality.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And tokenism is only bad if you call it tokenism.
Well, yes, exactly.
Representation is okay, and that you actually have to, as somebody who programs music, and we make this show all the time, it's not about tokenism, but it is important to look at the numbers and then question yourself and saying, not bias, because we think we've got past that, but are we using our creativity to look in the right places to make sure that we are representing people, as opposed to here's what gets streamed to us and here's what we can find. So
that's the thing.
I
just
think
doing a bit of work to figure out and unpacking a little bit of what our internalized bias is.
Yes, 100%.
That's so vital. And I think that a lot of people don't want to do that work because they think they're good folks.
Yeah.
And they don't want to ever think about the fact that, why do I only think 5 white guys in a rock band is music?
Right.
Let's spend some time with that.
Well, the good news is, for many people who don't like that, it's the 5 white guys in a rock band. That people only want hip hop now and dance music. So that is shifting away, right? So even the 5 white guys in a rock band are probably like the jazz of 40 years ago, where it's changed.
There's room for all of it.
There
it's
is.
So good.
We're doing a thing on we're honoring Joni Mitchell because she's turning 75. So we have this bunch of artists covering Joni Mitchell for our show. You know, there's that great legacy, which you know, she got on that train and she went east for the first time at 20, and she went to see you at Mariposa. What do you remember from Joni back in those days?
I remember, number one, that she was just startlingly beautiful, and that she was incredibly talented, a great guitar player, very original. She gave me her tape, and I carried it around in my purse for ever so long, playing it for everybody, trying to get some of these music business boneheads to listen to her. They either didn't want to hear it, or they listened and said, so, you know, Canadians are neighbor to the north. Oh, not another one, you know.
Yeah.
Finally, I played it for Elliot Roberts, and he was a junior agent in the agency that was handling me at the time.
Right.
The other agents didn't even they didn't get it, but Elliot got it, and he, and later partnering with David Geffen, you know, with Joni, made a great, great career. And I saw Joni a few weeks ago, and you know, it was lovely to talk over some things from the past.
Yeah.
And
like hash some stuff out?
oh, there was nothing to hash out, just to compare
you
notes
just gave
a
me
little.
that look in your eyes, and I'm like,
Oh,
what do you
no.
mean? What do you mean?
Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah. No.
I'm not quite awake. I was yawning.
No, I thought you were signaling.
No, not at all,
But
no.
just to relive or to share memories, that kind of thing?
Oh, we sat around her house. I got to see all her paintings, by the way. And I know we all adore Joni Mitchell and revere her for her music, but, you know, never having seen her paintings except online or, you know, in print, to actually see them, she is just as magnificent as a visual artist is. And that's saying a lot. No, she's really an extraordinary person, and I'm very glad that she had the career that she has had and reached so many people.
I like the fact that she, like you, both have this legacy of it almost all being on your own terms. Like it almost all, like people are kind of afraid of Joni. And I think that's funny. People like, you know, Joni's a tough business person, all that stuff, like no doubt you are. But I think it's interesting that it's just like, no, we're just going to do it this way. Like we're just going to do it this way, and how important that is.
Well, yeah, and as any of us in show business understand, there's the show, which is the artistry, and then there's the business, and very often it's the business that's in control. And sometimes you wind up with a crappy product like that. You're just printing money is what you're doing. You know, there's no art in it. Yeah. And hey, maybe Joni ought to design the new. Never mind.
Right.
Let's not go there.
What you know, we joked about electronic music earlier, but you were on that really early.
Really early.
Like in the 60s, right?
In the 60s, yeah. I made Illuminations in 1960 something or other. I can't remember. I guess we were making it in 66. I don't know when it came out.
69.
It came out in 69, yeah. So we were playing around with it before then. But, you know, just as a natural musician, I'm going to stick up for natural musicians, too. Because I'm kind of still like a 3-year-old seeing a piano for the first time. If I see something that'll make noise, you know, most natural musicians will have fun. And so that really is the basis of my music. It's having fun. It's entertaining myself. Right. And Joni or any other artist, we know when we like it. And we rely on somebody else to sell it. I'm not going to write something that, you know, like I don't design dollar bills. No. But the more I think of it, the more I like it, though.
You should.
This is sounding good.
It can sound prettier.
But you're also not bound by rules. It's not like, oh, I don't play this kind of music. Like, how could an artist who was a folk artist in a scene that was very serious about folk, they were pissed off at Dylan when he plugs in, and you're like, I'm going to make I'm going to work with electronic sounds way before anybody even knew what that really was.
Right, and I didn't really care. Yeah. See, I didn't think I was going to last in show business anyway, so I thought I might as well have as good a time as I could have.
This is the number of times you've said to me, I didn't really care. No, I think, honestly, I think that's like a big factor in a lot of sort of this idea of just getting to do what you wanted to do. Well, of course.
I was still trying to get to India.
Yeah.
I still haven't been.
You still, come on, seriously?
I still haven't been.
I'll go with you. Let's
Thanks.
go to India.
All right.
Thanks both of you for taking the time. Really appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. We'll see you next time.
For sure.